Bum, 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 bum. Bum, bum. What is up, guys? Today we are back with another deep dive. Today we are actually looking at a very interesting Pokemon, one that carries my favorite typing in all of Pokemon, and that is actually bug types. Just a little trivia in case anybody ever cares. So, today we're actually going to be talking about Forretress. Looking at it now, I have no idea if that's even spelt correctly. Anyways, Forretress is actually a bug and steel type Pokemon. At level 40 with 15s across the board, you can max out at 2282 there, so pretty respectable CP. You can achieve a 1500 at level 25 and a half if you have a 0 on attack, 9 on defense, and 15 on stamina. So looking pretty solid there. According to my spreadsheets and all of the math and all of the stuff that I have done, Forretress actually ends up ranking 11th, technically 9th in bulk if you remove the Giratina and the Probopass, since those aren't currently in the Great League. And we actually end up being 12th and technically 10th for the exact same reason in stat product. So pretty respectable here. I actually really like that. We're really high up on the actual, spectrum of all of the candidates in the Kingdom Cup, so nothing really to complain about. Now, moving on to our moves here. So we are a bug and steel type, so I do have those typings here color-coded for stab potential. And as far as our fast moves go, we actually are kind of lacking on some variety here. So we've got Bug Bite and Struggle Bug, both of those being bug type moves, both of them being extremely similar in terms of their numerical stats here. So Bug Bite here giving 3 energy per turn for 3 damage per turn, and Struggle Bug is a 2.67 energy per turn for a 3 damage per turn as well. So being that they're the exact same typing, being that they are, relatively close in numbers here, Bug Bite just happens to be the better one. Not really much debate there. If you do want to fight me about which one of these is better in the comments, I'll be happy to do that with you, though. Next, we actually have our charge moves here. So we actually only have one charge move that has stat potential, and that's Heavy Slam. So Heavy Slam being a steel type move, costing 50 energy for 70 damage with a 1.40 damage per energy ratio. And then we actually move on to Earthquake, which is of course a ground type move, costing 65 for 120 damage with a 1.85 ratio there. And last but not least, Rock Tomb, which is a rock type move, 60 energy for 70 damage with a 1.17 damage per energy ratio. So the one thing that I've noticed about Forretress and his moves is that's kind of what's holding him back. Honestly, if they gave him just a different set of moves, like, he could really shine. The fact that he has these 2 moves that are kind of middle of the road, they're not necessarily bad, but they're not necessarily, like, outstanding. And then these charge moves are just really bad. Like 1.4 damage per energy and 1.17? This is terrible. Like, honestly, I think if Forretress deserves anything after looking in this deep dive, he deserves some better charge moves. Even if they switched out from Rock Tomb to maybe like Rock Slide, or maybe they gave him like, I don't know, X-Scissor or Body Slam or something. Like just anything that really just, these are horrible. But dealing with what we have here, I did end up choosing Bug Bite, Earthquake, and Rock Tomb as my moveset here. So the reason that we go with Earthquake and Rock Tomb is to really help cover as much as we can. Considering that ice types are a thing, Heavy Slam will actually do quite a bit of damage to those ice types, but Rock Tomb ends up hurting the ice types as well, and also helps us cover some of the flying types that will be out and about. With that in mind, Bug Bite, Earthquake, and Rock Tomb, let's actually move on to our shield situation here. So in a scenario where I have 0 shields and my opponent has 0 shields, we actually end up winning 52.6% of the matches. So in a closing type situation where both me and my opponent have both exhausted our shields, 52.6 is not horrible. It's still not amazing, Coming off of looking at Lapras yesterday, it's kind of underwhelming to go back to these like 50% down here. But, hey, we got to work with what we got, right? So, in the scenario where I have 2 shields and my opponent has 0 shields. So the reason that we run this scenario is actually to end up figuring out what just flat out beats Forretress. We really want to know what we have just very little chance at beating and what really just becomes a hard counter to Forretress in general. So in this scenario, I have one thing to say. Fire. Next, moving on to our next situation, we actually have 0 shields for myself and 2 shields for my opponent. Now the reason that we run this scenario is exactly to figure out the opposite of our last one, which is to figure out what we just hardcore beat. What do we actually in turn beat no matter how many shields they have? That ends up actually being only 0.7%. Very small there. But so the things that we actually win against are like Alolan Executor, Weavile, Sneasel also in there, and Abomasnow. We actually end up winning against those, and I full on believe that all of that is just because Bug Bite is going to be super effective to all of those. In our last scenario here, we have a 2 shield versus 2 shield situations. So as a lead-off Pokemon, how well do we do? Well, not that great. We actually have a 29.5% win rate here, which really goes to show that Forretress is definitely more of a closer than he is an opener, which is kind of I mean, that's not bad. At least it's pretty defined, whereas in the past we've had just certain Pokemon just really just suck at both. But let's actually move on here to our matchups. So in all of my deep dives, I end up taking the subject Pokemon and I throw them up against all of the top 10 bulkiest Pokemon. Well, Forretress has a pretty bad time. Being that he is actually a bulky type Pokemon himself, I figure he would have a pretty good run at this. But, like I said, his moves just really make him underwhelming here. So we actually end up losing 2 Bastiodon, Steelix, Dugong, Altaria, Lapras, Skarmory, Torkoal, and Lucario. No! So we end up losing to all 3 Kings. As you can hear right there, all 3 Kings end up taking us. But we do end up winning against Registeel, Regice, and Probopass if he decides to be released during this cup. Next, let's actually move on to what does Forretress really need to be used for, and if you are looking to counter Forretress, what should you actually be using? In the scenario where you need to just straight up counter Forretress, what's the best thing that you can have? Well, things that are fire type like Charizard, Castform, and Magmar all end up doing really well up against Forretress. He does have a quad weakness to fire, so it really sucks. Then we also have anything that has fire. Yeah, I put it twice. Things like Arcanine, Combusken, and Ninetales. All of these fire-type Pokemon just really hold Forretress back in this cup. He has so many weaknesses in this cup, it's insane. So, unfortunately, fire types are the big issue for Forretress. If you see a person not running very many fire types, then you actually do have a pretty good chance, but fire is the bane of existence for Forretress. Lastly, if you want to counter Forretress, you don't have to look very hard into your team, as Lucario, Bastiodon, and Lapras, or the Kings, will also do really well up against our Forretress here. Next, what do we actually want to be targeting with Forretress? Well, things that have the flying type on them, like Articuno and Dragonite, they really get hurt by this Rock Tomb here. So flying types are kind of an easy target for Forretress to get to. Steel types also work in here, where like Metagross, Empoleon, and Bronzong all have a hard time getting over this Earthquake. And last but not least, things that just carry the Ice type in general, like Cloyster, Piloswine, and Glalie, they all have a hard time with Rock Tomb here as well. So, let's go over some positives and some negatives. Unfortunately, our negatives are first, and we just have one huge weakness. and that's fire. So fire being a type in the cup, being that it's a mainstay in the cup, means that you have a ton of stuff to go up against. Oddly enough, Forretress has a abysmal matchup against Magby. I'll just leave it at that, okay? Our next negative is that we actually end up losing to the 3 kings. So, being that we can't even take out one of the 3 kings is really, really rough. I'd at least be able to, like, put a Pokemon up on a pedestal if it beats at least one of the kings. 2 of the kings, like, ooh, I would, like, oh, really hold on to it. But being that we can't beat any of them really means that Forretress has a hard time surviving any matches in this cup. On to our positives though. So we actually do have a pretty bulky Pokemon here. Being 9th in bulk and 10th in stat product, that's amazing. That's actually a really bulky Pokemon in general, and I think that does mean something. I mean, he does have a pretty good matchup spread in general, but like I've said several times already, it's killing me. It's killing. And lastly, our last positive that I actually have for him is he does kind of have a wide use case, considering that you do have to dodge fire the entire time you use Forretress, considering that that is probably the #1 thing that you're going to have to play around. It's actually not that bad once you consider that Forretress actually has a pretty good matchup against things that aren't the 3 kings and aren't fire. So you actually do cover a lot of the ice. You cover the dragons. You cover quite a few of the steel types. I mean, you do end up covering quite a bit. So he could almost act similar to Glalie back in the Tempest Cup whenever, you know, Glalie covered basically everything that wasn't meta and kind of sucked at things that were meta. But hey, I mean, whatever. Whatever works for Forretress, I'm pretty okay with him. He's not terrible by any means. He's definitely not at the top of my list. Like, I have to have him on my team. I'll let you guys decide if he has a place on your team or not. I personally think that some teams that need extra coverage for things that aren't meta, I think Forretress actually fits pretty well there. Things that are teams that need a little bit more firepower against ice, flying, and steel types definitely could use some help from Forretress, but hey, it really depends on your team. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on Forretress down in those comments. Let me know what you think of him, and would you actually use him on a team? I don't know. I'm like 50-50 on him. Like, I really want to use him because, you know, he's bugged. He's cool, but I don't know if he really has the numbers to justify me picking him. So anyways, that is the deep dive on Forretress, guys. Thank you so much for watching. So upcoming, we do have Torkoal, and I think Empoleon is next, but I do have a couple of like special videos coming out. Like, I want to do one for each one of the typings. Like, I want to do like best in class steel type, best in class fire type, best in class dragon, and best in class ice. I kind of want to do a like maybe even like a top 3 of each typing, just to see what those are. I'd like to know personally myself, and I haven't done the research, and I'd like to pass that research on to you guys. So if you guys like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below, and until our next video, I will catch you then. Is it weird that I always walk that way? Like, what if I walk this way? Does it bother you?